behalf of the organization, as well as the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts, I'd like to welcome you all here to the Hawaii State Art Museum. This series, the Art and Conversation series, has been exploring different questions and provocations around the Hawaii Triennial 2022, Pacific Century, E Ho'omau no Moana Nui a Kea. But more specifically, this exhibition here at HISAM. The exhibition here focuses on artist collaborations against US empire in Hawaii, particularly native and non-native collaborations, expressed through the artwork and the life work of 5 artists and collectives, including Aipohaku Press, Elepaio Press, Pilia Mo'o, Namako Ka'aina, as well as Ed Greavy and Haunani K. Trask, which is the gallery we're in today. Today we have a panel of 4 artists who are kind of bringing this art and activism conversation into the present by talking about their own practice and reflecting upon the exhibition and how it impacts their work today. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Sunny Ganadin, Representative Sunny Ganadin. Sunny has been a longtime friend, artist, and writer, prolific writer, very active in the arts community for a long time. But I'll read his bio for you. Representative Sunny Ganadin represents Kalihi, Pearl Harbor, Hickam, and has been in office since 2020. He's an artist, writer, and attorney outside of elected office. As a member of the Honolulu Printmakers since 2004, he has received awards in honor of John Chin Young and Jean Charlot, and was the Orvis Artist in Residence with the Honolulu Museum of Art in 2016. In 2017, he was named Best Writer by the Hawaii Society of Professional Journalists for articles in Hanaho and Flux magazine. And he served on the board of Honolulu Biennial Foundation, now known as Hawaii Contemporary, from 2014 to 2019. From 2017 to present, he has worked as a director and mentor at the Kalihi Valley Instructional Bike Exchange, a program that incorporates Pacific Islander culture for youth in public housing. In office, he advances law that negates the impacts of the justice system on Native and immigrant communities and advances environmental protection and economic equality. So we can all please welcome Sunny and the rest of our panelists. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm trying to pull up everybody's bio. Just a second. We're just going to have to go with it, okay? Thank you all for coming. My name is Sunny Ganadin. I'm joined by 3 dear friends, Sean Connolly, Nanea Lum, and Kawila Mahi. Each of them expresses through their practice and their lives art and activism. I'd like to, as we go through it, just ask them to just give a brief bio of some of the work that they do. I'm so sorry that I lost this in the internet. And then we're just going to go right through with the questions, okay?
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Nanea Lum. I'm born and raised in Honolulu, and I'm an artist. For me, the interdisciplinary nature of my art is an intersection between art and culture. Growing up in Hawaii, I found it very important to express my culture as a Hawaiian woman, but also to help educate and support contemporary works, and how bringing painting into a visual conversation with our Olelo Hawaii was natural and very important to do. So I'm just gonna talk about my painting on the right and my kappa on the left. They came at different parts in my education because I was taught to paint at University of Hawaii Manoa from 2009 till 2014, studying painting primarily. I looked at color studies and the material history of painting from the Western perspective, but needed to insert my visual vocabulary as a Hawaiian. So using the high Hawaii and these symbols within a theory of Joseph Albers to talk about overthrow and to talk about sovereignty. And so through critical review of these works, a larger audience in art was getting to understand what the Hawaiian culture means in its contemporary, modern, oppressed time. So being able to talk critically about the overthrow was a part of my early education. And then the second part of my art education was in unlearning some of those tropes about the West. So being an artist to me meant being able to talk about painting and the surfaces of my tradition, like kapa. So I started harvesting the plant and taking care of it from the aina, beating kapa with my kumus, but immediately went into a contemporary practice of designing kapa using printmaking from lithography and also ohe kapala, but being able to use my ability to draw and my ability to read in different language, Hawaiian and English, to draw these histories closer to each other.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I think we're
Oh,
just
so go ahead.
running through it real fast, but
Yeah.
okay. So just to get everybody acquainted with the multimedia of my work, I'm a painter, but my embodied practice is in map making and kapa making. So by taking my materials directly from the land and leaving ephemeral pieces of that process behind, like maps and video works, I am spanning between the world of creation and creating. So finding the natural environment as a site for exploration in our language expression, like how we can interact with the earth so that it means more, as our kupuna did, searching for a deep, I wrote it down, a deep indigenous knowing was this calling that I had through being in group shows like Contact, which was one of Josh's early curatorial projects, bringing together voices of Hawaii to talk about issues that are contemporary, but pulling together from all of us a sense of knowing. And so I wanted to project that into the world that I was beginning to know more. And so this educational practice came from all of this gathering of knowledge, gathering of resources. I was recently a subject in a film that was screened in the Hawaii Shorts for the film festival, International Film Festival. And part of our story came from being drawn to this painting, which I created in 2017 for the Contact exhibition, Hawaii in 1,000 Years. So I was asked to create a work that would talk about philosophies and theories of Hawaii as it projects itself into the future. And the first thing that was important to me was retelling the story of Papa Hanaumoku and the entanglement between the body and the body of water, where we can't as humans separate our complexity from the earth. And so as we continue to evolve, we're still going to have these pilina, these relationships that we either maintain or are destroyed by. So to me, the compositionality in painting can help leave behind these ideologies of Hawaiianness. And so using my visual language along with these stories and titles, we can educate our generations to come and also help bring people of this moment closer together. This is another one of my pieces that explains like the mapping process, where I was physically going into the systems of water in order to explain them as resources of knowledge. So during the pandemic, I was isolated and I created this ritual, a ceremony with the earth so that I could have balance and to actually emit a kind of power from myself, a protective power. So the aha, or the ceremony, is displayed in these works that I also create with the aina. This is my thesis work from the University of Hawaii, and I can encourage you guys all to go and look at the dissertations that are available publicly through the Voyager website at Hamilton Library. That was a resource that was really important to me, connecting to generations of Hawaiian scholars. And the title of my thesis work was Eia Ke Kumu, after the Kawena Pukui volume or compendium of knowledge of Nana Ike Kumu. And so after having read those versions of histories, I completed this compendium of maps of Manoa. And so here's a map and my embodied practice within those maps. And I hope you guys go and watch Po'ele Vai, which is available through the HIF website, hiff.org. And you can buy tickets to watch all of the Made in Hawaii short movies. And I'm displaying contemporary art practice as it relates to a connective story of our water. Yeah. And I want to give the mic over. Thanks, you guys, for getting acquainted with my work.
Thank you all. Found your bio. Next up, we have Daniel Kawila Mahi. He's an Oiwi Hawaii visual artist, street scholar, political organizer, researcher, video game designer, and composer from here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Kawila's work embodies genealogical rhythms of sovereignty, solidarity, ceremony, and contested governance through ancestral Olelo Hawaii materials. His work is primarily focused on pre-colonial governance and anti-colonial praxis, where they interpolate and remix ancestral chants, stories, acoustomologies, and instrumentation, underscoring the rhythm of the underbelly of Hawaii.
Veera mai ke aloha, ia kākou pakahia pau, o wau no o Kawila Mahi, no kia aina nei o ahu a kākou I hewa, mai ka ahupoa o Mauna Loa. Aloha, I'm Kawila. I am a troublemaker from this island. I'm originally from Mauna Loa, what is now referred to as Hawaii Kai by most people. And yeah, the name got changed because of Kaiser Permanente, that same guy that went into that area. My family's been in and out of that area for longer than Kaiser has, so I'm gonna use the older name. This is a piece I made actually from a compilation of different works. And so what I do, my praxis for art, is all inspired by the matriarchs in my family. And I'll start, I guess, by talking about my tutuhine, my great-grandmother, who's from Molokai. She is a really well-known laymaker all throughout Maui, Molokai, and was the head laymaker for Kamehameha schools from the 1880s to the 1890s. And so she made her living making lei and giving lei out to people every year. And so her work as a lei maker, or makila lei, as we say on Maui, has really influenced how I do my work. But that genealogy, that praxis came down through my mother, Lena Alamahi, was a street photographer, especially in the Hawaiian sovereignty movement throughout the 1990s that most people don't know. Um, and her thing was reviewing lei making through her own lens, which was the camera. And then my work, I just kind of mesh what I've been taught by my kupuna, by my tutu when she was alive, by my mom, and then heavily influenced by streetwear and comics and anything I can be a nerd about. But this piece is about a ceremony I did with Kilauea. And so I actually took one of my mom's photos on the left from the 1990s, the aha that was made in 1997 to contest the Article 12, Section 7, which was trying to remove, I guess, at the time was trying to remove the native gathering rights. And so my mom was photographing the aha that was going on, the overnight vigils that happened over there. And I interpolated that with Kilauea and Halima'uma'u. And then on the right side, you see the aha that was being held inside of the state capitol, 2019, or well, this aha was in 2020, right before the pandemic hit Hawaii. And so I was trying to interpret, as the state has interpreted its space, that battleground of politics, as a luapele or a volcano. So I'm interlayering these kinds of I guess these lava are like the hupele of us as political people. One of the things I like to do is work on story design. And so a lot of this has been shaped by my work with Fitted Hawaii. I worked as one of their researchers for off and on for a couple years and still work with them sometimes. But what I did for them was I would research mo'olelo that they wanted to share with the people. And what they would do is translate the mo'olelo that I was giving to them into streetwear collaborations. And this was one of the ways that we tried to get people to know older mo'olelo, or even people that you wouldn't think would want to know these mo'olelo, these really well-known stories of these places throughout Hawaii, and get them to adorn themselves in these same stories, in these same mo'olelo, so that the story can live on beyond just the page. And do that. And so I also make video games, and the reason that I got interested in this is actually from the first video game I ever played when I was like 4 years old was Pokemon Blue. Yeah, I know. But one of the things that was hard for me playing the game is for all of us that were at Kekulakai Punio Ano e Nue, none of us knew how to read English. So we would play for hours and hours, and then we wouldn't be able to save it, so we'd have to restart. And from that time on, I was always interested in creating materials in Olelo Hawaii so that we can see Olelo Hawaii in different venues. I was fortunate enough to work with collectives to make a couple video games. And in the video games, one of the things we do, or as a collective we've done, is commit to retelling the stories of Kanaka Maoli and interpreting it visually through acoustomology sometimes too, and getting people like well-known chanters to come in and do chants for Kamapua'a that he would do when he transforms into an akua from a person to a demigod. And so really has been integrating these mo'olelo, these stories back into what's available to kids. And this is actually guided by the late Kumu No'ea Warner. And one of the things he used to say throughout the 90s and before he passed away is, "Ina heola ko ka olelo Hawaii e uhai no o ike keiki," which is, if olelo Hawaii is going to live, go where the children are and follow what they want to do. And a lot of the other work I do is inspired by and guided by and carved out by archival materials and photos from archives. And so one of the things I try to ensure people know is that for many Kanaka Maoli, having an interaction with these archival materials is really about us reconnecting with our kupuna. Sometimes we, for the first time, can see the signature of our ancestor, and that can be a really touching moment for some people. Sometimes you see a photo of your ancestor that you've never seen before or nobody's in your family has seen for over 100 years. And so this is really about, my work at the archives is trying to get people to come in and join my side for Hawaiian sovereignty, to understand their connection to these materials, and really about gaining access to spreading knowledge to their own ancestors, their own words. And sometimes I do music and help curate music shows for other people with archival materials. And so this was an award-winning concert by Rexy and the Brown Band. And so one of the things she wanted to do was expand how she talks about her place with images in back and talking about activism, especially through music that's persisted from the 19th century into today. So I just grabbed photos from the 19th century of well-known mele and composers, especially songs that we still know, like Polana Napua, which was composed for the Royal Hawaiian Band. And then I also make really uncomfortable art for people. And so I 3D printed a ki'i, akua, kuikawala ki'i, which is an akua for war inside of stories. And I 3D printed it out of plastic and made a lot of people uncomfortable. So that was a point. And then on the back side, kind of unclear, or that's on me, that's not on anyone else. But there's a peva spine that is inspired by many different mo'olelo that has guided kind of the research that I've done around mo'olelo and through design.
Mahalo Kawila. Sean Connolly is an artist in Honolulu, Oahu, where they were born and still lives and works. Sean creates work that focuses on material, place, and time. He works primarily in sculpture, architecture, land use planning, cartography, new media, installation, and land art. Through their work, Sean smartly creates clarity around the physical and spiritual conditions of the built environment. He engages the built environment and its effects on their communities to decolonize and address the traumas of settler colonialism, militarization, and modernism embedded physically in the environment, in architecture, and in everyday life. Through their own oral history and unique geo-perception of the environment, Sean aims to liberate the experiences that transform individual and collective responsibility into real sensation, cognition, intergenerational transfer, genealogy, deep ecology, global positioning, mystic alignment, healing, futurism, and spatial justice. The list continues onward in conversation. Sean currently serves as an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and has designed and taught courses at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, here at UH Manoa, and at Harvard. Big hand for Sean.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I always forget what I send to those things. It's such a pleasure to be a part of this amazing panel. For the conversation, I wanted to offer some examples of work. Of course, we don't have time to show everything. And the framework for the slides was past, present, and future. And so, starting with the past, I'm born and raised on Oahu. I grew up in Kalihi and Hei'ia, went to Castle High School. And so that really was an important part of framing my consciousness as somebody who decided to study design and architecture in college. But I eventually became an artist. And so I describe myself as an artist making work about architecture, and that my medium is the built environment. It took me a while to kind of like come up with that, maybe about 10 years or so, but I feel comfortable with saying that. My very first project was a project called Hawaii Futures. It was a new media website online And it was ultimately an exploration about land use in Hawaii. And so my starting point was a sort of question of land and land use and what is our relationship to land as the basis of our built environment. That basis was sort of on a concern of back then, climate change, which was referred to more as global warming, and stream pollution, understanding the impact that our built environment has on the flow of water from mountain to ocean. You can go to the next one. So the one I just showed you was an example of some cartography. So I started off as a cartographer and borderline filmmaker. But then I had a chance in 2013 to take my sort of architecture practice and bring that into sculpture. And I'm always just so thankful for this community for giving me a career in art, because architecture was, working in architecture offices for 10 years was not good for my mental health. And so art in many ways gave me life. And so this sculpture was my first sculpture, a small area of land. It was located in Kaka'ako at II Gallery, such a beloved space in Kaka'ako. And the sculpture really was an exploration of material and place and time. Specifically in terms of land, I was really interested in incorporating concepts of history. And so the sculpture had this sort of like geometric strategy to base the form on the sculpture in correlation to a specific time in history, which was the angle of the moon facing the sun on the day that land was privatized in Hawaii, August 6, 1850, with the Kuleana Act. We can go to the next one. So yeah, that was sort of like in the past, and I sort of jumped ship from architecture, traditional architecture, and started exploring more alternative design and architecture practice through art and sculpture, which, when working with something like the built environment, it's kind of hard not to be political because it's such a politically charged entity, and the sort of reason behind the work is ultimately based on the sort of sense of responsibility I have to this place. And it's a responsibility that I have because of the responsibility I have to the people I love and my friends. And it's really special here in Honolulu that you really can't find any other places where the work is beyond just work or research or practice. It's like love and responsibility. And so that really influenced my practice. I've always kind of been interested in, I guess you could say activism. It used to be called, would just generally just call it volunteering. But like participating. So when I was in college at University of Hawaii, I got really into like environmental work, like volunteering with like recycling, waste audit. Like this was back in 2006, before sustainability was like a sort of like a common phrase. And so I did a lot of sustainability, environmental work, and that sort of like evolved over time into more towards like social justice. Even just walking in pride parades or marching for women's rights. In 2016, I got to go to Standing Rock and got direct action training. And so eventually, after years of not really knowing what I was really preparing myself for, in 2019, I had a project which was about the Alawai Canal. Specifically, not just Alawai Canal, it was actually about the island of Oahu and the future of Honolulu, and sort of looking at ways where climate change could actually become a way to recover, systems like ahupa'a. And so I'm running out of time, but in 2019, the timing was right, and I was in the right place at the right time when the Army Corps project was trying to build a flood wall around the canal. But more like crazy was the proposal to build 7 detention basins in all the Manoa, Makiki, and Palolo valleys. And I learned a lot in the process. politicians like always encourage us to vote, which is true. Not vote, testify, which is true. Like we need to do that, but up to a certain point, like the testimony doesn't get you very far. And so I learned how to form an organization, nonprofit organization, to host a lawsuit to sue the city and state. So that was kind of like, I don't consider myself an activist at this moment, but in that time, I was like operating as an activist. My next one, yeah. I think this is the last one. So around that time in 2019, I was, I mentioned cartography. And so I made this is a 3D model of the cumulative militarization of the island of Oahu from 1898 until now. And so this was back in 2019 where we 3D modeled the Red Hill fuel tanks. In this video, it's a 20-minute video that you can see it online, and it goes through the entire history of the militarization of this island. And the part that I'm working on now is the part where we reimagine all the military sites in the future. So there's actually a section where Red Hill fuel tank is sort of reimagined as a sort of like indoor greenhouse. Like it's kind of dumb, but it's like for conversation, right? Pearl Harbor is sort of reimagined as all the fish ponds restored. I guess we can go to the next one. This is my last one, and sorry for taking more time. So in terms of like the future, really sort of committing to this sort of idea of incorporating, like looking at the future of architecture in Hawaii, trying to make architecture more accessible to the public. And so this is a sculpture that was in 2020 at Thomas Square, but not many people got to see it because the fence was up. But it incorporated sort of like a modern architecture structure of a truss with canoe lashing that was adapted for the architecture. And so in a way, all these canoe lashings, even though they're based off of canoe lashings, they're also all sort of like unique, brand new inventions that I collaborated with the artist Kupihea to install. And then I'll just end with what I'm working on in the future, which is to support my art practice, I help nonprofits and foundations with like land use and design and data analysis and stuff like that. I mean, I do that through my private practice, which is Afro Oceanic. I sort of call it, it's a long name, a Pacific Lab of Applied Theory and Culture and Design in the Built Environment. And I'm working on founding a nonprofit organization for architecture, which is aiming to bring architecture to Aina orgs. So thank you so much.
Big round for Sean. I'm gonna back it up a little bit and just say thank you so much to the Hawaii Triennial, to Josh and Rose for allowing me to be here. We are in a gallery that is showing images from Save Our Surf, which was organized by a lot of young people, and John Kelly Jr. in the 1960s and 70s. A lot of the community organizers that are in these pictures went on to preserve the democracy here in our state. Also, please accept my apology, Nanea, for not pulling up your bio. I will write your grants in the future as a replacement. I asked the presenters to present to us today to try and situate themselves in the present moment of art and activism here in Hawaii. But looking ahead, the ongoing dialectics between local and non-local, military, non-military, government and activist groups, they continue to evolve. And the ongoing crisis at Red Hill that you folks all were a part of in some way in the last year, as well as the crisis at Mauna Kea over 2019 that Nea mentioned, may give an indication of a changing conversation regarding the influence of corporations and the military here on these islands. So there's a re-emerging conversation within, I suppose, this generation, discussing the return of land to indigenous peoples and to the state and this community, this diverse community. In 2029, the lease of state lands to the Department of Defense, which includes large tracts on Hawaii Island as well as here on Oahu, is going to be up. How do you see your art practice interacting with that ongoing conversation and with the community in the next few years?
Thanks for the good question. You mentioned Mauna Kea really quickly because that was a protest on the Mauna, so that we did not have telescopes continually erected and desecrating sacred land. So what I learned by protesting up on Mauna Kea was how to activate my personal sovereignty. And this was an educational moment because I was a master's student at the time, uprooting my education and placing it back with my people on Mauna Kea. We started a Pu'uhuluhulu University, which was giving free college level education to the public. And one of the greatest lectures that I sat and listened to was about genealogy. And one thing that I know is when we embody our ancestral knowledge paths, we find our aina. And when we do that as individuals, it encompasses us, it redirects us. We end up standing in the right place at the right time. And so, with all of these claims to land coming back up, and it might seem like a land grab or maybe like crabs in a bucket, as we've heard from the past of people fighting over kuleana of a very special vahipana. But to me, it's about not asking for something back, but to coming together. So I had a slide in the beginning with my kapa that was a'ole na ke kahi e ha'awi mai, a'ole na ke kahi e ho'i mai, na kako e lave aku. And that was something that I heard over a soundbite that activated me to go and stand at Mauna Kea, but also something that taught me deeply not to ask for anything, but to go and work for it. And so, like, really braiding those pilina, like weaving aha with people standing against the telescopes, that was reclaiming the land. And so, I guess my simple answer is going to be to continue to do community work so that we can get those positions back over the control of certain land parcels that have been bombed, or like I know organizations that we have all worked together and separately to be a part of, and as artists we contribute to their efforts in like stuff like fundraisers and group shows. I just see in the future those things having much more momentum and impact as we're like sitting inside of a really great installation of art that teaches and also gives like a sense of duty to people who are receiving all of this information. So as one of my answers is that we're just gonna keep going and we're gonna have even more say in some of those things coming up. But I'll give it to.
Mahalo nui Nanea for sharing a bit about that. And I like what you're talking about, especially in relationship to Mauna Kea and how many kia'i came up to protect those lands and developed or were activated themselves to, I guess, be more in community or even for the first time to understand the complexities and intricacies of what a love for the land looks like or aloha aina looks like, especially in Hawaii. And it wasn't just Kanaka that were coming in and out of that space, but many people were co-conspiring, I guess, to really make that shift, and if not a shift in the polity that exists all around the world, at least a shift in their own political consciousness. For myself, I think one of the things I've committed myself to is doing community education and public education through organizations that I work with. And sometimes that looks like doing workshops on National Hawaiian holidays so people know how these lands were stolen, so how people know what was there before. But the reason that I pay really close attention to what was there before is for us to imagine what it could be in the future. beyond what we understand it as today. And so doing some, especially for me, like archival research, I study kanika, which are like coin dirges for people who have passed away. But they're one of the most intimate understandings of lands that can exist because they intimate rain names, wind names, river names, and all these other types of interactions that we don't see or are out of common usage today. And that's really useful when we go up in contesting things like an environmental impact statement. I can provide these resources and say, there's no way you did all this environmental research because I know for a fact you don't know the names of just these rains from this one chant, or just these winds from this chant, or all of these names for a river, all of these stories that are part of this place. And so that's kind of been one of my commitments as of late for imagining how we can develop a relationship as individuals and as a collective with the places that we're at, while ensuring that everybody knows, not just Kanaka, not just people who are coming for the first time to Hawaii, but everybody knows these deeper, older stories of these places so that we can ensure those stories live on beyond us.
Cool, good question. Yeah, Nene, I love your work. It keeps me like going. And I love following your Instagram. I'm always learning something new. Yeah, I guess the first thing that comes to mind with regard to that question, which was about our practice and these sort of upcoming events with things like the military's leases coming up. I think one is the work advocating for Hawaii history. We sort of take it for granted here. But like, for example, in architecture, Hawaii history is like pretty much like absent from like the whole pedagogy of architecture. And so you have the people who are building our built environment who like are not getting that basis. So Hawaii history, advocating for Hawaii history. With regards to the ability for art to help people see maybe what they don't know, and then also connect to it and feel it. Because you can tell somebody something exists, but then you can show them a picture of what it looks like or how it's impacting, and then it like hits them in the heart. And then I'm thinking about the idea of heart from Auntie Mari's talk when the Hawaii Triennial was starting up, where she talks about like artists and heart. Like with the military map, creating, making information accessible so people like see what they don't know, and then also thinking about futurism. So with the next installment of the video of the military map, it's already done. Like it was all finished in 2019, but it just is how things go. And so I've been like slowly chipping away at the second part, which is reimagining what all the military sites will be. So that sort of brings up a question of like, when you look at this thing that's happening is not new. What do you call? Bellows Air Force Base, Barbers Point, those are all examples in the past where the military has sort of relinquished land, but we as a community, or I don't want to put it on the community like as a state or whatever, government weren't really prepared for that, and so it kind of just like went through all like kind of this like there wasn't really like a vision to start, and so I think if we start now thinking about what to do with these areas, and the thing is like we already know what to do, and the answer's there in the communities that have been like advocating and fighting for these lands forever. Finding ways to lend our practice to listen to the people on the ground, and what's the last one? Just being prepared. Like we just need to be prepared for these things. Yeah.
All right. I've got another quick question, and then I was hoping to open it up to the audience. I was told we have the room until 3:15, okay? Have you folks ever felt conflicted, say in your personal lives or amongst your families for the activist stances that you've taken or the kind of artwork that you've made, knowing that many of us who come from immigrant or native communities we have families that aren't used to sitting here on panels or coming to events like this to have, quite academic conversations about their interactions with government. Have you ever had to have those tough conversations with your family or friends?
Yeah. Like I think as somebody who comes from the 90s, like there was all of this like family like change, right? And people who are educated in Hawaii, like we learn about all of the changes with like just accommodating more, accommodating everybody, not being left behind. Um, and some of the inclusion discussions that we have to have around our institutions are really tense and can make people feel like ostracized or demonized for just being. And I think that art and poetry allows that esoteric like space for you to actually be. And so I've always been like the poetic person in my family who asks really difficult questions on being, like what's it like, how does it feel, and how could it be projected so that more can understand. I've been at the center of so many of those discussions, especially with people fighting to change their own perspectives. Um, they know that there's something that they're very pushing up against, and that they're fighting to see themselves in a clear way. And so my work doesn't tell people what to think, but allows them to do that. Um, and a blank page is really where I found my solitude, like my sacred place, is in the blank page where you can be expressive. And so when people read that, when people receive like your truth, it's going to empower them too. And so hopefully that brings like people closer together, um, and being willing to read and not just to be the only one talking. So yeah.
How do I follow that? um, I'm very privileged in that, um, like I grew up in an activist family. My mom was on the front lines in the 90s and actually was an understudy of Ed Greavy. So I was in it for most of my life, but so I credit a lot of the privileges I have, the spaces I'm in, to my mom specifically. Like being in classes with Honanike Trask, just sitting in as a kid and getting kicked out because I'm too loud. Just like, which is odd knowing her. But it really has been outside of like, because I was raised by a single mother, so a lot of the time it was mostly her guiding me through that and trying to figure out what activism looks like even outside of Hawaii. Because I lived in the Bay Area for a little bit during my childhood, and when I lived there, yeah, I got kind of pushed into organizing with like Latino youth, and like we would walk out of like school almost all the time because they had like furlough days or because we had like racist teachers, and so it's kind of been part of my life. As uncomfortable as it's been, um, I'm okay with that. I'm like just pretty enough for people to listen, but I'm joking. But that really is about. I mean, outside of that, there is still like choke military family. Like I have choke military family, but I think when it comes down to it, I tell them like, this is your history too, and if you don't want to agree with it, it's still there. It's still the truth, and so that's kind of been my approach. Is I'll leave the historical research there. If you agree with it or not, it doesn't change that this is the mo'ola alone. This is the story that's being put in front of you, and that's uncomfortable with you, then we don't have to be friends. It's not a big deal. But if you do want to stay with or commit to this aina and being in love with this aina, and having like public displays of affection with the aina, I'm your guy.
Cool. Let's see. I'm trying to remember the question real quick. Oh yeah. So Um, well, I would s- I would say I'm very privileged to sort of come from like humble roots to the extent that um, I my family's like the quintessential plantation family in Hawaii, and so my grandparents who are Ilocano, you know, had 8 kids, and they grew up in Kalihi and um, of across the range, like we got everyone, like Japanese, Chinese, Portuguese, Hawaiian, and then white. And so kind of growing up in that like kind of like assemblage of culture in Hawaii, that makes it. I have a very supportive family, and my a queer family, a matriarchal family, and so I really benefit from that. So I wouldn't say that there's usually much conflict when it comes to like family. They're generally supportive. Um, and even in the instances where our political views don't necessarily align because of generational differences, there's still like at the core some sort of like desperation to do the right thing. Um, so but when it comes to friends and community, that kind of can be a different story. And I feel that it kind of becomes a game of like like knowing like knowing how deep to go like in conversation. Um, like trusting your gut, knowing like when to actually like keep talking and stand up for something, and when to kind of like take a step back. It's like kind of like a very tricky kind of balance to play. And yeah, I feel that's like kind of one of our challenges, is to like we all want to do the generally we all want to do the right thing, but how do we like come to the same sort of like common ground in conversation? I think is usually where I find the conflict can be ultimately very rewarding if you like commit to working through it. So yeah.
Right on.
I'm gonna add one thing. Just to give all of the credit to these artists here, like what you guys do is these acts of subversion, like using subvertive tactics, like in the programming and like digital materials that you guys have been given lots of capability and ability to speak with. And so to me, like the Hawaiian contemporary art world is all about recognizing all of those subversions and all of those techniques within our music, within our hula, um, and architecture and sign making and t-shirt making. All of it has this really specific subversion that is happening because we are Hawaiian and we are not American. And so if you're able to read all of that really subtle nuance, you're in the conversation with us, and then we're pulling people into our canoe as well. So
Thank you so much. Those are amazing responses. Um, uh, for me, as someone who's in government, knowing that you are having this vibrant, forward-looking conversation, I'm attempting to assist with translating this into policy, to um, to make acts of subversion um, acts of truth, and to hopefully find their place in the law. Who knows how long that's going to mean for my career, but I'm just happy to be amongst all of you. Also knowing that we don't do this in a vacuum, so artists are from the Western conception usually identified as like solo acts, as somebody who just sits alone in a studio working on their work. We know that we work in communities and in families, both in our practice and in our community organizing. So we wanted to open it up to you folks. If you could just shout something at me, and then I will speak it into the mic for the folks on internet land. Let me repeat it for Internet Land. The question from Ms. Lalo who is how do you interpret your work for outside communities? She used the mainland as an example.
Oh, thank you, Ara. That's a good question. And I don't want to take all the time because I'm curious what everybody will say. But I guess two things. One, in terms of like the work that I do when I'm like teaching, um, um, it's 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 always a surprise to realize just how much people don't know about Hawaii and our history, and it reinforces the value that a lot of people who are from here and stay here, the value that they have that they don't know. Like we all have so much value being from Hawaii, living in Hawaii, and staying in Hawaii. That oftentimes I think we overlook in an incredibly like sad way. And so that's kind of something that I that comes to the forefront because people on the mainland are always so like stunned or like blown away or like literally they'll hear something about Hawaii and it'll like transform their life, or they'll come to visit and they'll like yeah yeah Hawaii brings us together. And I guess the last thing I'll sort of say is in terms of the challenges and sort of like the back end of being in art, I feel like our work is often misunderstood, and the range of our practice is sort of misunderstood. And I have that experience from the Joan Mitchell Fellowship, which I was nominated for. But when I submitted my application, I probably put in too much of my activist practice. And the feedback was that like they couldn't see where my practice was going. They didn't understand how like the activism work connected to my dirt sculpture. And so there's, I think, in terms of trying to get support for our livelihoods, most of the money is based in North America, and it's like Hawaii's constantly overlooked. And so I think it makes it really hard for us to tap into those resources because they're missing that basic understanding of Hawaii history.
So we were talking about being translated, right? And the vulnerability of that. I have been generously giving all of the supporting information for understanding my work. So creating a painting that comes from a mo'olelo, being the person to retell that mo'olelo in oral history, and then also teaching about the compositionality of the physical work. So when you're the person tasked with making it and doing the education, it can feel really like this hamster wheel that you're on, trying to just feel seen, trying to feel understood and given all of your respect, really. So we work as Hawaiians in this modern time as translators on a new plane, as transformational people with our histories and our languages. And so what you said, Sean, is really true about being so of value, because our experience is complicated but also very generous and giving, and it's a part of our survival technique, really, to gather this information and to share it so that we continue to have places to live like Hawaii that are sustainable or have sustainable histories. And so I've heard it said before, and it's very like inspiring, but Hawaiian culture is going to save the world. Because when you understand the reciprocity within this ideology, you will act better. You will have more respect for your surrounding, and you'll listen before you yell across people, because there are foreign places everywhere around us. We kind of have to respect that. And so if you're kama'aina to Hawaii, when you go to other places, you listen first. And so just within that culture, we're trying to get that across the globe because we already live in that globalized digital world. And so if Hawaiian culture can save the world, then we're going to continue to be as Hawaiian as we can.
I'll go quick. One of the things that I think I've personally focused on is the social, like the sociality of it. So how do I interpret that this root problem, whether it's imperialism or colonialism, impacts you? And how do we attack it from our place and our perspective might be useful for another place. And so finding these threads and these pillars for not just resistance, but like pre-colonial thought, and trying to interact with many different places about how we can take on these really difficult, almost abstract systems, but chipping away at it like step by step, or like carving out piece by piece, so we can all, like as you said earlier, and as you talk about being on a canoe together. And so for me, that's kind of my approach, but also one of the things I try to do is I offer a history of their place through Hawaiian language first. And so like I'll go, like if I'm going to Boston, like, oh, this is how our people have talked about Boston. And that's kind of like an initial point of contact for people. But also it's me being a better, I guess, tourist in their area. Like I'm not just going there and saying, I go make any kind, like I just gonna go check out everything, which can be fun, but I want to know why my people have talked about this place, or why they've gone to this place, or how they've talked about these places, so that I'm a better guest when I visit.
Right on. Nanea's got a response. Yeah.
One thing.
Yeah.
It's about the water. It's about the water. We all have to drink water. All of our lives are connected to water. It's like the simplest way of navigating life. And I've always been a huge fan of Sean's work. Like Sean's work with mapping and the cartography that comes from your practice, it refocuses what Hawaii is through its water. And so I've actually found that if I'm trying to talk to somebody from the mainland, ask them, where's your water come from? And it's the quickest way to like get them to understand where you're coming from, is because you're also trying to get them to talk to you about where they come from through the water. Yeah.
Right on. I like that because it's not citing mutual forms of oppression, but like, you know, mutual forms of joy and like ways that you can identify with to get your fresh water. We got one more from the audience. One of the classic quotes from Dr. Trask regarding Hawaiian identity and it being politicized. Let's see. You also asked about any pushback that you might get from commercial systems and ways that you might have to moderate your practice or react to that.
Sean said something earlier in our, like, when we were getting ready for this talk about the margins, like being pushed to the margins, because what you say is very direct. Like what you're saying has heat. So it gets kind of like pushed to the side a little bit so that there's more space for everybody. And Sean said, sometimes the deeper you go, the less impact you can have. So like making sure that when you're delivering your message, it's not going straight to the direct message, but maybe using references that we all have so that it has a deeper impact. But I really like what we're doing in each other's practices, like using the material itself that we work with as the messaging for aloha aina, for sovereignty, so that you yourself don't have to explain to everyone what the work means, but that the work has its own language explaining Hawaiian sovereignty to a diverse collective of the planet.
I'll let you on the last one, unless you want to go first.
I guess. Yeah, it is about kauna, and intranje, polysemy, multiple meanings, whatever you want to call it. I think we take so much time to focus on if it's publishable or not, and at a certain point, you have to be, once you're culturally competent, you become culturally confident, and you don't really like worry about if you're getting published. That doesn't mean we're not still seeking like funding or like still trying to be published, but at a certain point, it's really staying committed in how we want the project to be presented, and not compromising on that. And sometimes that's really uncomfortable as an artist. Like it's really difficult for many artists, myself included, to be in a space where you're not going to compromise culturally on how you want this to be experienced, whether that's visual, visceral, or any other like V word that rhymes with that. And so, yeah, it comes down to Aua and Kauna, I think, for a lot of people.
Thank you. That's a good question. I'm hearing it in my head. Dr. Trask saying the only way to fight the United States is to be political, and so I think there it's like you know, the United States is like the elephant in the room there, where you know, it's really hard to have conversations when it gets to like a scale that's so big that a lot of people like can't grasp the scale of what the United States is, this sort of like global technology company, and so yeah, there's that sort of like issue, and then there's also the question of how to be political, like all the different ways that we can be political. You know, it's a real issue because some people like literally can actually lose their jobs by saying the wrong thing or participating in the wrong event, and I've seen that happen to people, and so yeah, I think trying to figure out like how to also support each other. You know, there was a time in my life where like if you weren't like like if you weren't anti-capitalist, then you were like dumb. But like it's like impossible. Like we're all embedded and we're all entangled in this sort of like situation. And so like over the years, I personally have sort of like learned to be like more accepting of the different ways that people can be political and the different ways that people can relate to something like the United States. But I will say that, like, you know, in 2019, if I were to have said the greatest threat to our water is the US military, a lot of people would be like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? But now that Red Hills happened, like the politics around the military have definitely shifted, and more people are like willing to like listen because they actually feel affected. So I think that we're in a really good place, and hopefully we have good leaders to like help us be political in the different ways. You know, everything from what you post on Instagram or talk about at family dinner to like the organization you fund or start to do whatever. So, yeah.
I'd like to thank all of you for your continued bravery in staying with us. As Sean mentioned, being a political artist does mean sometimes losing your day job and losing state funding, and it's tough work. And there's many examples of that we know of in our own lives and throughout the history here in Hawaii. I think we got time for one more. Anybody? Okay. Well, just a big round of applause again for the panelists. Yeah, I'm going to hand it off to Josh to close us out.
Mahalo everyone for coming today, and mahalo for those who are joining in virtually. The museum is open today until 4 p.m., so if you haven't seen the exhibition, please, it's on the Leahi side of the gallery as well as the Ewa side. So make your way through. And the exhibition will be open until Saturday, December 3rd. And on the second, we will be having a closing event as a part of First Friday here at Hawaii State Art Museum. So please tell your family, your friends, your ohana, your coworkers, everyone, to come and see it before it closes. So mahalo nui to our panelists once again, and mahalo to Sunny for moderating today. So aloha.
Mahalo to all of you.
Thank you.